Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 11 Pro Max and the iPhone 14 Pro Max are both great phones. Of course, the 14 Pro Max is a few years newer, and so if you're thinking of upgrading from the 11 Pro Max, I wanted to help you decide if you should switch to a 14 Pro Max. Now, the first thing is price. Apple no longer sells the iPhone 11 Pro Max, not new anyway. Now, they currently have it refurbished, but I probably wouldn't pick it up from them as it's $899 for the 512 gigabyte model. So typically you can find these online around $600 depending on where you get them. But there's three models, 64 gigabytes, 256 gigabytes, and like I mentioned, 512. Now the iPhone 14 Pro Max, being the latest phone, is still quite expensive, starts at $1,099 and goes up to $1,599. You have 128, 256, 512 gigabyte options, and also a 1 terabyte option. So you definitely have more storage if you need it. Now, as far as colors, both of these are space gray, or what Apple calls space black with the 14 Pro Max, but it's basically a slightly darker space gray. With the 11 Pro Max, you also had silver, gold, and a midnight green color as well. And so as you can see here, space gray, it looks great. There's quite a few options to pick from. With the 14 Pro Max, again, space black, but we also have deep purple and then gold and silver. I prefer the black color, but each one of them looks great. It just depends on what you prefer. The overall build of both phones is very similar. We have glass on the back, glass on the front, and we also have stainless steel around the outside edge. Of course, the 11 Pro Max has curved edges, where the 14 Pro Max is squared off, which makes it feel much heavier. In fact, the 14 Pro Max weighs 8.47 ounces or 240 grams, where the 11 Pro Max is 7.97 ounces or 226 grams. So there's definitely a weight difference there. There's also a thickness difference since the camera bump sticks out so far on the 14 Pro Max. As you can see here, you can see how much further that sticks out. It's definitely a big difference there. Anytime you hand this to someone else, it feels much bigger. They're very surprised usually if they have one of the phones that's rounded on the edges as to just how big it feels. Also, if you're putting a case on it, it's going to feel even larger. Of course, like I said, we have glass on the back and glass on the front. And for the past few years, we've had ceramic shield, which seems to hold up a lot better than the 11 Pro Max glass did. Now, if you use a screen protector, this doesn't matter, but after using the 11 Pro Max for a year, it has a ton of scratches in it. So you can see this is the one I used for about a year at the time and has a bunch of scratches in it. The 14 Pro Max, being so new, doesn't have any, but typically it seems to hold up a little bit better as far as ceramic shield. However, I did drop my 13 Pro Max, which has ceramic shield on it, and dropped it into steel, and it gouged the glass. You can see that here where it hit a nail, and then you've also got a couple scratches. Typically, with just using this regularly, moving it in and out of your pocket or maybe a purse or something like that, I wouldn't expect too many scratches on ceramic shield. But if you bump it into something that's very hard, whether that be a diamond ring or something else, definitely you can scratch either one of them. However, the 11 Pro Max, in my experience, definitely scratches easier. Now, also this year, we don't have a SIM card tray on the latest phones in the United States. So there's no SIM card tray, and you can see how many fingerprints this picks up, but no SIM card tray like we have on the 11 Pro Max. And the 14 Pro Max also has 5G and Wi-Fi 6. So definitely some upgrades there, but also downgrades if you want to travel a lot. Since outside the US, you'll probably want to get a SIM card still. It just depends on where you're going. Now, both screens look great in regular content. And as you can see here, we have very different looks now that we have the all-new Dynamic Island on the 14 Pro Max. Apple has added this sort of as a playful area for different notifications and apps. So if I play a song, swipe home, it goes up to the Dynamic Island, shows us that the music's playing. If we press and hold, we get our media player, and this goes along with just about every app out there that wants to utilize it now. So you now have the option for different apps to use it. If I close music, go out of it, it shrinks back to its normal size. With the 11 Pro Max, we have a large notch that's been there for a while. They shrunk it a little bit later, but the notch is one of the larger notches of the phone. So neither of them seem to bother me, but I do like the extra functionality of the Dynamic Island. Now both screens are OLED displays, but the 14 Pro Max is greatly upgraded compared to the 11 Pro Max. Now on the 11 Pro Max, we do have a nice display. It's got great viewing angles, but it's a 6.5-inch display, 2688 by 1242 pixels with 458 pixels per inch. On the 14 Pro Max, we have a 6.7-inch display that also has an always-on display. So you'll see that's what it looks like. You just turn it off. Looks like it's still on. Gives you your content. Of course, that can be disabled. And then it also ramps down to 1 Hz refresh rate and all the way up to 120 Hz for ProMotion. So it has a lot of features that the 11 Pro Max doesn't. It also is 6.7 inches at 2796 by 1290 pixels with 460 pixels per inch. So with ProMotion, always on display, and also brightness, that's where it gets a big bump. The 11 Pro Max has 800 nits of regular brightness up to 1200 nits of peak brightness in HDR. But the 14 Pro Max has 1000 nits of regular max brightness, 1600 nits in HDR, and 2000 nits outdoors. So that's its peak brightness, over double of what you would typically get with regular use on the 11 Pro Max. So if you're in very bright environments, you'll definitely want to try out the 14 Pro Max. Now, if we're playing HDR content, here's one of my videos, the 12 Pro review in HDR. So let me turn it down here. I've adjusted the brightness way down so that you can actually see it without this being recorded in HDR. So if I hit play and we rotate both phones, it probably looks pretty normal to you as far as brightness, maybe even too bright. However, they go much, much brighter. So this gives you an idea of what it looks like. If we go back into the control center, gives you an idea of what it looks like. It can go much, much brighter. So both of them are great with HDR, but if you want the very best, the 14 Pro Max is unmatched by just about everything out there. Now to go along with the displays, of course, we have speakers that are in stereo on both of them, and you'll see the speaker on the 14 Pro Max is right up at the top, where the other on the 11 Pro Max is within the notch. The bottom speakers look pretty much identical on both of them, so as you can see here, they're very similar on both. Now let's go ahead and take a listen to what they actually sound like. So let's go into YouTube and play one of my videos. Now the speakers of both of them sound pretty good. They go nice and loud on both, but the 14 Pro Max seems to be a little bit more heavy on the treble, as where some sound is a little bit better on the 11 Pro Max. Now this really depends who you ask. My wife switched from a 12 Pro to a 14 Pro and said the speakers don't sound as good on the new phone. I think they're very equal depending on what you're doing with them, and if you actually use it for music, you may hear a difference. If you're on a phone call, you probably won't notice it very much. And they're both nice and clear on a phone call, no issues there whatsoever as far as that goes. Now, as far as overall specs, the iPhone 11 Pro Max has an A13 Bionic, 6-core CPU, 4-core GPU, and an 8-core neural engine with 4 GB of RAM. The 14 Pro Max got a bump up from last year's A15 Bionic to this year's A16 Bionic. So the A16 Bionic has a 6-core CPU, a 5-core GPU, and a 16-core neural engine with 6 GB of RAM. So definitely a bump up over the previous one, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll see much of a difference in everyday use. So if we go into an app such as Geekbench, with benchmarks, of course, you're going to see a difference, but not necessarily with everyday use. So we'll wait for it to load here, give it just a moment, and you can see the difference in RAM right there. And the different versions of iOS, that won't really make too much of a difference as far as the overall CPU scores, though. This will give you a good idea. So we'll go into CPU and run a benchmark test. Now, as you can see, the benchmarks have completed, and for the 11 Pro Max, single core and multi-core are significantly lower. 1,327 compared to 1,881 for single core, and 3,019 compared to 5,381 for multi-core. You will notice a difference in certain tasks, but not necessarily everything. So if you're just opening up music, maybe wanting to play music, something like that, you'll see it did load a little bit more quickly, but maybe it was loaded already. But in general, you'll notice a difference just because of ProMotion, but most apps are going to be very similar. You'll see I had a little hiccup on the 14 Pro Max even, and a little odd behavior on the 11 Pro Max. So that's some bugs with iOS 16, but maybe if we're exporting 4K video or opening a game up. So if we go into a simple game here, let's see if I can find my games on the 14 Pro Max. Let's go ahead and open up Minecraft. Just see what kind of time frame it takes to load this game. Give it just a moment here. You can just see in real time. It's already done on the 14 Pro Max. We'll hit play. And these were all closed ahead of time. Create new world. And we'll hit create. It does need to be updated on the 11 Pro Max. So we'll give it a moment here. And it looks like we're still going to be faster on the 14 Pro Max, as we would expect. And as you can see there, they're both loading. And we're in on the 14 Pro Max. We're loading resources on the 13 or the 11 Pro Max rather. So very similar as far as that goes, but in general, you're going to see basically the same performance. Once you're in, you may have to wait a few more seconds, but with regular use, it's not that big of a deal. And actually, I went back and checked, and Minecraft did not need to be updated. Now let's go ahead and export a 4K video and just see if there's any difference there. Now, I've imported a movie into iMovie. I've used this clip before. It's recorded with an iPhone, and they're the exact same duration movies. And also, I've split the clips at the same point and also put in the word Zollotech, as you can see here. So as we back up here, you'll see the word Zollotech on both of them. Same clips, edited the exact same way. Let's see how quickly they can export. So we'll go ahead and hit done, and then we'll share these out. Now I have both videos ready to save as 4K videos. We'll hit done, and let's see if we can save these and then see how long it takes for this to actually export. So again, save, and let's let go, and let's see how long this takes. Now, between both of them, they're both going to be very similar, as you saw, maybe within a couple seconds of each other. So not really a big difference there with editing video, exporting video, opening apps, but there's a big difference when it comes to the cameras. So let's move this aside. We'll swipe home. And when it comes to the cameras, of course, we have a giant camera bump on the 14 Pro Max. So those have been upgraded significantly since the 11 Pro Max. The 11 Pro Max has three 12 megapixel cameras. We have a main f1.8 aperture or main wide camera, an ultra wide f2.4, and a telephoto f2.0. We have dual optical image stabilization with wide 1x, 2x optical zoom, and then we also, of course, have smart HDR2. So we have some night modes and things here, but nothing compared to the 14. Now with the 14 Pro Max, we have a 48 megapixel main f1.78 camera. We have an ultra wide f2.2, 12 megapixels, and a 12 megapixel telephoto f2.8. We have an ultra wide, of course, as far as photos, 1x, 2x, 3x optical zoom, adaptive true tone flash, photonic engine, smart HDR4, night portrait modes, photographic styles, macro photography, and Apple Pro RAW. So a lot of big changes since then, along with 4K HDR at 60 frames per second. We also have a big update to the front camera on the 14 Pro Max, where it now has autofocus and 4K 60 video. So a lot of big advancements since the 11 Pro Max with that. But I wanted to share some different photos and videos from the front cameras and rear cameras as well. So go ahead and take a look at this. This is the forward-facing camera of the iPhone 11 Pro Max and the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of what it looks like and also what it sounds like, as you can hear the microphone from the 14 Pro Max. Here's the 11 Pro Max, and I would expect the 14 Pro Max to be a little bit better, but let me know which one you think sounds best and looks best in the comments below. So let me know what you think of the cameras. Of course, we have an action mode as well on the 14 Pro Max for ultimate stabilization that brings it down to 2.8K as well. So lots of different features with the latest phones. Now, the batteries in them are a little bit different as far as size. The 11 Pro Max is 3,969 milliamp hours for up to 20 hours of video playback, according to Apple. It has fast charging, 50% in 35 minutes, with an 18-watt adapter or higher. And the 14 Pro Max has a larger 4,323 milliamp hour battery, with video playback up to 29 hours, according to Apple. It has, again, fast charging, 50% in 35 minutes, with a 20-watt adapter or higher. It also has MagSafe and Qi charging as well for wireless. So we do have wireless charging on the 11 Pro Max, but not MagSafe charging. So the overall battery life in regular use is very similar. The 14 Pro Max will get a few hours more, usually a couple hours more with regular use, but if you leave the always-on display on, sometimes people are experiencing about the exact same. So in general, there's really not a giant difference, but there is a step up with the 14 Pro Max, mostly just because it can hold a larger battery and has a more efficient chipset in it with the A16 Bionic. So if you're looking for battery, the 14 Pro Max is definitely better, but not hugely better. Now, as far as wireless connectivity, of course, the 11 Pro Max does have Wi-Fi 6. It has LTE and Bluetooth 5.0. We've got 5G with the 14 Pro Max, so we do have the upgraded antennas, 5G antennas, Wi-Fi 6 still, but now Bluetooth 5.3. But we also have millimeter wave. You can see the antenna here. So if you have 5G in your area, you want the ultimate speed, go with the 14 Pro Max. As far as the overall IP rating to keep dust and water out, the 11 Pro Max is good for up to 4 meters for 30 minutes with an IP68 rating. The 14 Pro Max also has an IP68 rating of up to 6 meters for 30 minutes. However, I would still put a case on them that's waterproof if you plan to go swimming with them, as Apple does not guarantee against water intrusion. So if they do get wet and it damages something, they won't cover that. So keep that in mind. If you're ever going underwater with them, I always recommend a case. That's normally what I put on them, a waterproof case. Now, if you're trying to decide if you want to upgrade from an 11 Pro Max to a 14 Pro Max, you will immediately see a speed difference. When my wife upgraded from an iPhone 10 to an iPhone 12, she saw that speed difference, and the same is true when she upgraded to the iPhone 14 Pro. She noticed the smoothness, the overall just speed of using everything, and definitely the camera improvements. So if you care most about that as well as battery, the 14 Pro Max is the way to go. However, if you can get a good deal on the 11 Pro Max where it's significantly less than half or even more, then the 11 Pro Max will still not disappoint. You'll still get software updates for years, and Apple typically supports them for many years. So I would expect the 11 Pro Max to get at least up to iOS 19 maybe. We have 17, 18, and 19 in the next few years, probably at least 3 years of support at this point, with many additional years of security. They haven't actually said specifically how long they're going to support it though. But either one is a good phone. If you have an 11 Pro Max and you don't really want to upgrade yet and you want a big redesign, well, iPhone 15 should have that. So It really is up to you, but the 14 Pro Max I think you'd be very happy with. We're still waiting for new features such as satellite connectivity with the 14 Pro Max, and it does have crash detection. So additional features that again are not available with the 11 Pro Max. Both are great, but again, the latest is of course going to have the most features. And the camera is definitely better, especially when you zoom in to one of those high-res photos. But let me know what you've decided this year. If you're going with the 14 Pro Max, maybe you picked up an older phone, an 11 Pro Max, maybe an iPhone 10 or a 13. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And of course, if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, it will be linked in the description as I always do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.